The Dutch royal family have formally apologized for slavery. They've commissioned a committee of historians to look into the history. The French have commissioned really serious research into what to do with their colonial items. Germany has paid reparations. They're just much more on it. And even America, there's serious conversations about reparations, But in Britain, our answer is no. We have legislation banning the return of items, right? And you saw it at the coronation, the gap between what the Commonwealth countries wanted to talk about, the reparations, return of their loot, and our total refusal to go into. Well, I mean, King Charles did give a bit of ground, didn't he? He's finally.
Well, the Queen Consort didn't wear the Kohinoor.
Yeah, that was a kind of political dodge. Also, he said he approves of the research. The Royal Archives being opened up to research, but we're talking about one PhD researcher who might report by 2026. Compared to what the Dutch royal family are doing, it's ridiculously small. And compared to how much of an issue it is, even within the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth, we struggle to say what it's for, but one thing they really do want to talk about is reparations. And it's the one thing we don't want to talk about.
Do you think it's helpful to talk about decolonising the curriculum? Just that particular word, do you think that's quite a divisive word?
Yeah, I think it's divisive. I think it puts people's backs up. Also, I think ultimately it's impossible. Because if you're going to decolonize this room, first of all, we wouldn't be here. You've got to undo some profound things. The wealth that slavery produced is baked into Britain. It's like trying to take, the egg out of a baked cake. You can't compensate for slavery because you'll be talking about trillions. And people do try to calculate the amount of money, and we're talking trillions and trillions of pounds.
I thought that was what was very interesting, actually, in this book, is that when you're talking about the wealth and you talk about how empires shape towns and cities and countryside, you really try and draw that out in places around the country so that children actually look up and look at these buildings and think about the wealth and how these buildings came to be there. Why was that important to include that?
I think with kids, you've got to relate it to their lives, and probably with adults too. And that's one of the easiest ways. So many everyday items like nutmeg, HB sauce, Worcester sauce, all arguably come from empire.
Which people wouldn't think about.
Yeah, I'm always discovering things. I discovered the other day that my English course, I did English at university, English was taught as an academic subject in India before it was taught in Britain. And actually, it was imported into Britain. A lot of the teaching materials used in India were used here. That's amazing. The idea that my English course has also had a colonial element to it. But I'm always discovering things. I discovered things whilst researching stuff for this book, which I hadn't thought about. London Zoo. I'd never thought about how that had colonial origins. I didn't know that Raffles was involved in creating it. And things keep coming up all the time.
One of the most important parts of the book, which is actually a really important part of understanding Britain and multicultural Britain, is the explanation of the 1948 Nationality Act, which was such a turning point moment for me, and probably you too, when I realised that actually there was a piece of legislation that meant that our mums and dads, when they came over, were British citizens, and that they were already British because of empire.
And not all of them.
Not all of them, but until
the legislation was undone.
Of course, but initially until they kind of
fundamentally the people on the Windrush.
And the Windrush, exactly.
Came
up until 1962, and then it began to be watered down. And so that when people say go home, actually, they were British. Where would they go home to? Is that why you kind of make a big point of it in the book? You're trying to show children this kind of longer history.
Yeah, and I think it's the most important lesson because everyone seems to have forgotten about the Windrush scandal, but our government deported British citizens to countries they didn't even know, because the level of knowledge about empire was so poor amongst civil servants. That's the real world consequence of not knowing this history. And that was one of the things that the Windrush inquiry picked up on. That we need to teach people the basic fact that black people in the 1950s and 40s came as citizens. And I still think that's really poorly understood. And I think it's partly a consequence of the media narrative, endless idea that brown people are interlopers and don't really belong. And it's amazing that that narrative persists when we have a British Asian Prime Minister, British Asian head of the SNP. It still persists, doesn't it? And it's been really bleak that the government are watering down what they're going to do about Windrush. Step by step. They did say they were going to take on all the recommendations of the report, and now they're not. And it's shocking. We should be more angry about it. I think people are angry for like a month, and then everyone's just forgotten about it.
But that's the direct consequence of not knowing your history. And the same was in the Stephen Lawrence report as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it comes up regularly. It's like happens every 10 years. Everyone has a dark night of the soul. Britain feels really bad about its own racism for about 2 weeks. And then we go back to the normal narrative, which is actually we are beyond racism because we beat the evil racist Nazis, we abolished slavery, and now the narrative is we have a British Asian Prime Minister, therefore racism doesn't exist, has never existed. It's just not true.
What I think is really unusual about your book is you give practical advice to children about who face racism, or how to challenge silence about learning about empire, but also really importantly how to be an ally. That you're giving lots of different types of kids a vocabulary. Why did you do that?
I think I know from personal experience that it can feel very lonely, having this knowledge, and a lot of people not having it. It can kind of make you feel isolated. And I just didn't want kids to read all this information about empire and then not know what to do with it. And I think there are constructive ways to talk about this stuff. I mean, it's too competitive, the way we talk about empire. I think you can have a debate within a school about whether Sir Richard Drax should pay reparations to the descendants of the slaves that enriched him and made him one of the richest MPs in Parliament. You can have a debate about that without it being toxic, and you can learn a lot of things, and you can be on both sides. I can see both sides of that argument. So I think kids are much more flexible than we give them credit for.
You say build a statue, that you're not that into tearing down statues. What would be your statue?
I'm mainly not into tear down statues because I feel like they're street furniture. We already think about them in recent years, right? I'll put one up for Dean Mohammed, the first Indian who ever wrote a book in English, the first Indian to the first person to open a curry house in Britain, and who ended up being a kind of massage therapist for the king in Brighton. Incredible life, and kind of forgotten.
Married an Irish woman, didn't
He
he?
married an Irish woman. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, my whole adventure into empire started with him because I thought, oh, you know what, I'll write a novel about this amazing, weird guy. And I thought I better research what it was like to come from India and what it was like under the East India Company. And because he came over with the East India Company manager of sorts. And I started researching it, and that led to Empireland. So here we are.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Mm.
All down to Dean Mohammed. I've just been thinking a lot about change, and because people talk about apologies, they talk about reparations. You mentioned some European countries that are doing it, considering it. But could change also be the next generation, and that they deal with this subject that in our lifetime has become so kind of, as you say, toxic? They just deal with it perhaps in a more adult way.
Yeah, I think there's too much focus on, we've got to change the curriculum. The curriculum doesn't matter that much because academies don't have to teach it, private schools don't have to teach it. And as we know, Wales and Scotland have different curriculums. And also, I do feel like kids are getting their knowledge from other sources, like podcasts. I mean, the Empire podcast is incredible. You've both been on it, haven't you?
Yeah.
And the rest is history. I mean, did an amazing couple of episodes on Christopher Columbus. There's Instagram accounts like the History Corridor run by a history teacher, Brown history account, and I joined TikTok yesterday, and
I think your publisher told you to do that.
I did, and I've got only 1,000 views of one video and probably 200 racist messages. So the view to racist abuse ratios is incredible. But kids are getting their knowledge from all sorts of different sources, and yeah, the change is happening. So people on the far right can attempt to take it on, but I think it's having no effect on the young.
Why is it at this particular moment in time? So if we think about the British Empire really drawing to an end, from beginning with 1947 when they withdrew from India, why is it now, 2023, that the empire is so incendiary? Why now?
I think about this a lot. It's bizarre, isn't it? Because Empire ended a while ago. Why is it now one of the biggest topics in the world? Partly, I think it's, like I said earlier, the British destroyed the evidence, and historians are only just discovering some of it. The Mau Mau case is a classic example. Um, and even now, you can't get Lord Mountbatten's papers, right? You can't read them. And he was such an important figure for Indian independence. But on top of that, I think the first post-colonial generation, I'm thinking here of people like our parents who emigrated, but also the people running India and Nigeria and so on, they were so focused on building themselves, like building India and dealing, frankly, with all the destruction caused by the British. They didn't have energy to go over the history. And I feel like new generations have the time and luxury to sit down and actually think about it.
But maybe they feel more secure to do that as well, like their place here.
Absolutely. And it's an amazing thing. I didn't think Britain would be as confident about its multiculturalism as it's become. I don't think.
And that's actually a really important thing to say, that in our lifetime, so much has changed. I mean, when we were kids, to think that you and I would be sitting here talking like this, we wouldn't have imagined it, would we?
No, I know. I went back to my Cambridge College to talk about empire, and it was amazing that the English course has been decolonised. But it also really pissed me off because it's like, it's not fair. Why did we not have any of that? It took me so long. And, but yeah, I mean, it's all different now, isn't it?
So if things have changed in our lifetime, maybe in our lifetime we will also see a time where actually we are more comfortable about talking about empire and our past.
It's going to happen. I mean, in a fundamental way, truth prevails. You can't suppress the truth, man. It's going to come out. You can fight it. You can try to call these people like us woke and culture warriors and whatever. You cannot argue with the facts. You cannot argue with the consensus amongst imperial historians. That can change, but you need a lot of evidence. And so I think it's inevitable.
I just wonder, when you were that little kid in Wolverhampton, growing up in your Punjabi family, what would having had a book like this in your household have done for you?
I think it would have given me a better sense of place in Britain. It would have help me understand the racism that was all pervading in Wolverhampton. But it would have explained the Sikh psychology, because the Sikh identity as a martial race, which is one we've really gone for and embraced, was created by the British. The Sikh community arguably grew to large numbers in the 19th century because the British adopted us as a loyal race to fight for them after we took their side, generally, after 1857, right? And so much about British Sikhs can be explained by British Empire, and I don't think British Sikhs necessarily understand that, and I certainly didn't know it. No one's ever explained it to me until I found it said by historians in quite obscure books.